Transferring wealth successfully starts with asking yourself questions that will give your family a better life now and for generations to come. In this podcast, financial professionals John and Michael from Copper Beech Financial Group guide you through eye-opening questions to help you discover the truth about your wealth. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to The Truth About Wealth with John and Michael Parise of Copper Beech Financial Group. Today, the podcast is entitled Align Your Tribe, which I love that title. Gentlemen, where did that come from?
Well, it came from really just talking about how advisors need to collaborate a little bit better on behalf of families, and that's sort of the term that we utilize when we're talking about that. It shouldn't be a foreign concept to many of the families, but it ends up being. So it's a nice catchy way to bring that topic up.
Yeah, it really reminds me of it takes a village to raise a child kind of thing. And that's kind of my background, working with kids a lot and working with families. It takes a lot of different people with a lot of different skills and talents to be able to surround somebody and bring them up or make their future better. And that's what it seems like to me with a team that you have around you right now.
Yeah, that was a great analogy. I think we'll use that in the future. Thanks, Eric.
It's free too. You can just use it all you want.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. It started way back when, early on in my career. If you go back to and listen to the first podcast, it's how I started in the business. One of the things I noticed pretty routinely that most of the advisors that work with affluent families or families in general, they were pretty much a silo. They made recommendations based on a product sale to the client or a certain advice to that client, but they never really reached out to the team of advisors that often worked alongside the client, particularly if he's a business owner. They have CPAs and they have in-house accountants and they have, a bunch of attorneys that do different things for the business and personally. So I saw that as from my standpoint, a weakness in helping that client through a discovery of what's the best solutions to his planning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So where do we start today with really explaining this concept to the audience?
Well, I like to use the analogy, especially if and most of our client base are privately held business owners. And the analogy we often make to them about why this topic in particular is so important for them is many businesses, and I think you would probably attest to this as well, Eric, they spend a lot of time in their business building good teams and having collaboration within their business, whether that be different departments or employees even within one particular department. But the business owners recognize that if they don't have that collaboration in place and that the whole team and the business isn't working together cohesively, that errors are going to be made or they're not going to be as successful as they otherwise would be with that cohesion. And so we really like to just bring up that concept and say, well, who's doing that for your family? Or do you have that same mindset with your family? Because your family has equal need, perhaps even more need from our standpoint, to have that same level of cohesion. And that's really what we do as a practice, is to help be that catalyst to initiate that collaboration between the family's key advisors.
Yeah, the client's always stuck in the middle, Eric. That's the term I think we've used on a couple podcasts, where he's in this middle of making all these very important decisions, as Michael said, in his business, and he relies on that team to give him that input because they're specialists in a certain area, like the legal team, the accounting team. He doesn't typically have the time, temperament, or training to learn all the pieces, but he relies on them. And to Michael's point, they start to see that they need to develop that inside their family structure. Because, again, they've been a great CEO or leader of their business, but they haven't been a great CEO to their families. So that's the bridge that Copper Beech kind of travels across to help the clients understand that we can help build that bridge with them and be a lead sponsor of that collaboration to bring all the best ideas to the table for their families as well.
Yeah, it's evident in any business that's successful, and I'm not trying to pat ourselves on our backs here, but with Top Advisor Marketing, this is the group that produces your podcast specifically. We have a key person that does an amazing job, and she's going to be embarrassed that I say this, but Lisa, and I know you're very familiar with Lisa, she helps to coordinate all the different parts of what Top Advisor Marketing does, because we do have those different pieces. You've got podcasting, you've got social media, you've got branding, and all those teams separately work great separately. But when we need to collaborate on things, that's where we can get a little disjointed because we have our own agendas, we have our own thoughts, we have our own ideas. And then Lisa does a great job of bringing those things together. And that's where I see you guys, and not calling you Lisa, but in that type of role where you have an attorney who has his idea and thoughts for his family that he's taken care of for all these years, and a CPA that has done the same. And you've got a financial advisor who's done the same. And they may all think that they have the best possible idea for them, but with kind of some blinders on. Is that what you find?
Oh, absolutely. I all the time. And it really is not to say that any one particular advisor isn't skilled or isn't talented. There are very few advisors that we work with for our families that aren't skilled and talented, but they don't have the same perspective or the full picture, if you will, in terms of the decisions and the advice that they're making. And again, as my father said, being stuck in the middle, they're making advice directly to the family member, and the family member is very often left to decide whether that advice is great for them or fits their needs or is taking into account all the various options. And so they're stuck in the middle to try to do that. And oftentimes we've seen families that make not poor decisions, but maybe decisions that aren't maximized because they didn't take into account other things that were going on in the plan or that other advisors were doing on behalf of the family. Even in some cases, conflicting advice or duplicative advice. We've seen that where
countless times.
Yeah, where one attorney is doing work and doing a great job, but another advisor, another CPA is maybe doing similar advice or similar tasks, and the client ends up having duplicative work that they're paying for. It's unfortunate, but sometimes that does come up. So again, it's really important that the family have somebody that is overseeing that and is bringing the team together to collaborate to make sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody's bringing their best talents to bear on behalf of the family to make sure that all that advice and all that skill is maximized.
Yeah, let me say what the challenge is when we cross that bridge. If you think logically for a second, when he runs his company, he works with his employees. That's a whole different relationship than he has with his family. So when you cross that bridge into the personal life of a client, you have to really understand that he has a lot of complex issues with relationships with his children or a family in the business or even with a spouse. It's uncomfortable for them to look at that side of the world. But let me tell you, Eric, the failure in families we see, if they don't pay attention to that personal side and that planning on that personal side, they lose millions and millions of wealth to the generations because they didn't step up to the plate. So we believe our strength is we start becoming more psychiatrists. I know we laugh about that all the time, and family counselors as well as financial counselors, because it's very hard to make that happen. So you have to have a strong desire to have a bond with that family. And that's really what our messaging is. If you can't form that bond or willing to have that bond with a team like ours, you don't fit our model. So that's all tested, as we talked in previous podcasts, in the initial meeting with the family. Once they accept that, they allow us into their personal world. And once that happens, really, really good things start to happen, which is with this collaborative side of what we do is so powerful.
And I know
it is a really powerful tool. Just to add to that, when families see that they have their accountant, their attorney, their investment manager, their business CFO all sitting at the same table or all on one conference call together on a regular basis, strategizing on their behalf, it's pretty powerful because they now feel comfortable knowing that everybody is on the same page and that it puts them at ease, believe it or not, because, again, a lot of times they're stuck in the middle to try to make all these decisions. And we've had really, really good feedback from the families that we work with that have had that, or that we've helped build that process for them.
Absolutely. And we've talked about the whole counselor, psychologist kind of role before, and it is kind of funny to think about it that way, but it's so true. And I know that we have talked about the relationships that the family has with each of one of their consultants, and they've had maybe for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and how you've managed to cross those bridges and bridge the gaps and make those relationships stronger, even as they all work together. But I have a kind of a follow-up question to that. How does that relationship maintain when the main person in the relationship, whether it's the matriarch or the patriarch, when they pass away, how does that relationship pass to the next generation?
Now, that's a really good question, and it's pretty insightful actually, because when you look at many families, there's very often one, let's say, spouse that is really handling a lot of that work, if you will, or that communication with the advisors. And so if that person was no longer there, there is this gulf, if you will, between the other spouse in terms of now having to manage all this. In fact, we're dealing with that right now. We just had a client pass away suddenly, and thankfully we had just completed the plan, or a lot of really heavy lifting of the plan, probably about a year ago. But one of the questions that we asked him, he was a business owner in this case, we said, if something happens to you, which of your advisor team do you want to make sure is in place to help your wife and your kids build this, keep this process going, all the things that we've built? And this transition, it's never easy when somebody passes away for the family, but it's one less thing that we think the family now has to be concerned about. In fact, I think, Dad, you were at the funeral, right? And I think his son had or was approached by somebody who said that, well, now I guess you have to really wrestle with the estate plan, as an example. And he said, no, we already have that built. We have Copper Beech, and they really coordinated all of that for us. And so we're in great shape. And that really made us feel good, because now we've built this process, and again, it was suddenly, you hope you never have to use it, but in this case, it was built, and that's one less thing the family has to worry about now while they're grieving with the loss of a loved one. So it's really important.
Yeah, and this is the backstage of what we do, which you don't see too often, thank God. But you'll see the power of what's created when you have all these collaborative teams in place. Because when I went up there to meet with the family, I met with the CFO of the company, I met with the attorneys, I met with all the people that were involved in making decisions with the family going forward, and they knew our role as that family office hub. And we are now the coordinators of all the activity going on with this backstage piece of someone passing away. And he was a great client, a great guy, very much loved around the community. And the fact that we are now in place, as Michael just said, we really put this heavy lifting in place a year ago. It eased the stress on all the family members from our last meeting. So it's really important that families understand that they have to have teams in place to make sure this gets monitored and tracked and communicated appropriately.
It's really a family succession, if you will. And we talk a lot about business succession, and we had a podcast on that earlier around, if you passed away tomorrow, what happens to your business? And a lot of that discussion is really building good teams within your business to make sure that the business can thrive if the owner were no longer here. It's a similar mindset on the family side as well. You have to have that family succession. You have to have a good team around the family if something were to happen to a matriarch or patriarch or a party who's really handling that responsibility. So it's an equally important task that families of wealth may not be thinking about as much, but they should be.
Yeah, I'll share a personal story. It goes back to, I think, the first podcast I talked about. My parents passed away 8 months apart from each other. And one of the things that happened in that transition, and we often ask the question to our families, who's the next leader in your family? Because parents know, have an instinctive reaction to their children. Who's going to take that lead role in guiding the rest of the siblings or family down that road? And how I kind of sensed that when I met with my Aunt Molly. She was a woman that babysat us when we were younger, and she was a wonderful woman, and her husband passed away, and I went down to Delaware to help probate the estate with her and hold her hand and be that family friend. And she started to cry. And I said, Aunt Molly, everything's going to be okay. I'm here. We'll help you. She goes, oh, no, I'm not crying because of my husband passed away. I'm crying because your mother was right about you. And I stopped. And I said, what do you mean? She knew you were the one in the family that was going to guide the family because you had the emotional strength and the focus to get that done. And my mother never shared any of that with me, and which made me feel like 10 men, obviously. Yeah. But families know, or mom and dads know, who the next leader is. So picking out that leader is going to guide the family. It's not necessarily a perfect solution or an answer with that particular person, but it's a good guide.
Well, and they need sometimes a support system around that person to help navigate that transition. So that's really, again, where we can be the initiators of that collaboration with the other advisors to really help that next generation leader build this, whether that's education, training, financial education, legal education, that sort of process we can help. And it's important to have that support system in place.
By the way, my brothers and my sister at that time was not aware of that conversation with my Aunt Molly, but I shared it with them a while back, and they said, "Yeah, we hats off to you. We're on your team. We're ready to help you."
Yeah.
So that was a very interesting part of my life.
Nice. Obviously, death is never an easy subject, but actually I was at church this weekend and my pastor brought up something that everybody chuckled at, but he said, there's one statistic that's really had staying power for a really long time, and that's basically death on earth is still hovering at about 100%, right? Everybody's going to die. Everybody, that's going to be part of life. I mean, we just know that. So people trying to avoid it, I would assume, is really the problem, dragging their feet to make decisions, procrastinating because they don't want to face that. And you guys have talked about that before, so I don't want to dwell on that too much, but it sounds like you've had a lot of success stories with families really understanding, hey, this is a part of what we're going to be facing as a family. It's better to do it as a team, not only within the family, but then within all those outside advisors, so everybody's ready for when that time comes, even if it's a sudden death like this gentleman you're speaking of from this last year.
It's extremely important. It's vital, we feel. And unfortunately, there's, again, far too often the family's left trying to be stuck in the middle, or is being stuck in the middle to try to make these decisions, and they don't have anyone to rely on to be able to, determine whether one recommendation by one advisor is a good one and versus another one. And it could cause confusion, and that's not something that really any family needs, but especially a business owner who's spending 80, 90 hours a week in their business. They very oftentimes do not have the time to really parse through all of that information to make that decision.
Yeah, the other piece is, and it happens routinely with everyone, but when someone's looking for advice, they get 4 or 5 different opinions from 4 or 5 different people. Mm-hmm. So you got to be careful. And I said to his wife, a very closed meeting, I said, you be careful when you get advice to do certain things, take a deep breath and wait, and make sure you tie us in that loop. Because remember, we're the builder of the plan, and we're like the architect, and everybody else is, in this particular relationship, a subcontractor. That we're the one that's designed it, and we're going to implement the processes through these other advisors. But we need to understand what they're telling you if we're not involved in the meeting. And she said, absolutely. I'm not going to make any decision unless I get you guys in the loop first. So that, again, that's what Copper Beech does is in this family office practice, is we try to take that role. And in this particular case, it's working perfectly for us.
Yeah,
and for the family.
Absolutely. And at those times, we all know that there are people that would take advantage of people and that would prey on a situation like that. But there's also very good-hearted people that maybe they're friends of the kids, right? They're friends of the kids, or their brother or sister has I got a guy that works financial, and you need to talk to him because this is a big deal. And having that security and being able to say, you know what, we've got a team, right? Or even if they want to bring somebody in, we're going to run them by Copper Beech. So we know, we're going to bring them to the guys so they know what's going on and what they're talking about. And I know that you guys entertain that kind of stuff.
Families use us all the time for that. If somebody approaches them about, whether it's maybe let's say a money manager as an example, well, they hire us to oversee that or to perform some sort of due diligence over that money manager. So a lot of times they'll say, well, go talk to Copper Beech. They're my family CFO platform, and we'll get together and we'll make a decision one way or the other. And so they kind of take themselves out of that loop, which is great. That's what they hire us to do.
Absolutely. No pressure on them. It's all on you guys. And you can play the heavy or the bad guy all day long. I have no doubt about that.
We don't like being bad guys, but
Well, you're the bad guy only to the bad guys because you're weeding them out. So that's good. That's good.
That's a good way of putting it.
By the way, we have a process that we created a while back that gets the advisors involved. So it's a Copper Beech process that we use that allows us to communicate with a new relationship with a family. We send letters out to the advisors, introduce ourselves. We sometimes meet them face to face. We get them connected to the technology that aggregates and puts all the information for the family together in one spot. So there's a lot of activity behind the scenes to get that relationship strong with these other advisors.
Well, that's a great point that we haven't touched on really, which is from the advisor standpoint, this process that we go through really, when we've had feedback from other advisors about this, it helps them in their business as well, because in the investment world, as an example, there are plenty of statistics that talk about how investment advisors get replaced by the second generation, as an example, because they don't meet with the children, or they don't meet with the spouse, because one spouse is only having that relationship. And if something happens to that spouse, all of a sudden, like you said, Eric, the children say, oh, I have a friend that can take over this portfolio, as an example, or I have a lawyer who can handle the planning going forward. And so unless an advisor really bridges that gap and develops a relationship with the next generation, their own businesses can suffer because of that. And so this really helps bring, again, just that good team of advisors around a family. That's that family office concept that we've touched on a lot. And so that really is a benefit to the other advisors as well that we really haven't touched on yet.
Yeah, we call it keeping it sticky, because if the clients, advisors are part of a team with us, it makes their position very secure with the family, because the family doesn't want to disrupt that team if it's working well. So that's really an interesting psychological approach to this. But to Michael's point, that's what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, I've worked with advisors for years, and I pick and choose who I work with, just like you guys do. You pick and choose what families you work with, because they do have to fit the model that you have developed and perfected over the years. But the advisors I choose to work with, they have to be fiduciaries. They want to be fiduciaries. And so I can see this being a huge advantage for advisors that team up with you, because that allows them to be a true fiduciary when they're part of a team, so they know what's going on with the estate planning attorney. They know what's going on with the accountant. They can take all that into consideration when they're making different recommendations or they're giving advice, instead of just doing it from their own little platform and not exactly knowing how it's going to affect everything else, or not, having their hands tied by not being able to work with somebody else that maybe they just don't have a very good relationship with. It's right. You guys who tie that in.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, there's been quite a few times where we've had advisors come to us and they've made an initial recommendation, and that recommendation maybe wasn't the best one, not because they didn't do that they did something wrong. They just weren't aware of another piece of the pie that really impacted that decision. And I think there was what was that story that you told about that estate planning documentation with the where the attorney wasn't aware of the inheritance that the family was going to receive. Do you remember that story? I think it was that you were at the table signing it, or it was the day before. Something happened where you talked to the attorney. Essentially, as I understand it, I'm probably going to butcher the story because I wasn't there at the time, but I always thought it was a really fascinating one, where it was estate planning that was going into place, and you were at the table, and there was language in there that basically was not going to generation skip the estate tax at the time, or the generation skipping tax, because the attorney wasn't aware that the mom and dad, in this case, that were signing the documents, one of them was the daughter of a highly successful company, and were going to receive millions upon millions of dollars from an inheritance standpoint. And so when they were designing their estate plan, that wasn't factored in. And again, the attorney, through no fault of her own, I think, just wasn't aware of it. But that's the sort of thing. Now, whether or not that could have caused legal liability to that attorney, I don't know. But again, it's just making sure that everybody has all of the information to just maximize the effect that we're having on families.
Yeah, that was a very Michael, a good memory. But that was a great learning curve for me. That was early on in my career, and what happened in that conversation was the attorney they didn't get all the data on the legacy of the family. So we go upline and downline generationally. So I went upline and asked about mom and dad. As it turns out, my client's going to inherit $40 million, which was way into the estate tax exposure piece that they didn't exclude in the document. So the attorney turned around to the client. Thank God John had all that data, because I'm going to make the correction today, so we make sure we don't miss that opportunity for skipping generationally. So it was and my clients were smiling, and they said, thank you, John. That was a great insight. So it really fits sometimes by accident how our modeling works, but it's really dynamic when it does.
Fantastic. Anything else we need to cover? I know we're getting low on time today.
Well, I think if you're interested in learning more about this philosophy, there's a book that is pretty influential to us. It's called The Wisdom of Crowds. It's by James Surowiecki. And this is a book that really expands upon this thought process. But the thesis, if you will, is that groups of individuals tend to come up with the right decision more often or more frequently than any one very, very smart person can come up with. And so this just reinforces this team mentality. And so sometimes you don't even need to have the smartest people, one person that you're working with. It's important to just have a lot of different minds, a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different specialties when you're going through this planning.
Fantastic. John, any closing thoughts from you today?
Yeah, there's no I in team. It's an old,
go.
adage, but you got to have a team in place. That's imperative to make all this work.
It's old school, but it's so true.
Yeah, it is. By the way, that book was called Wisdom of Crowds.
Yep, Wisdom of Crowds. All right.
Great book.
All right. Thank you guys so much for your time
Thank
today.
you, Eric. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Eric.
And thank you all for listening to the Truth About Wealth podcast with John and Michael Parise. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when John and Michael come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Copper Beech Financial Group, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Truth About Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Copper Beech Financial Group. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.
This material is for informational purposes only. Neither APFS nor its representatives provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Please consult your own tax, legal, or accounting professional before making any decisions. Securities offered through American Portfolio Financial Services Incorporated, a member of FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory and financial planning services offered through American Portfolio Advisors Incorporated, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Copper Beech is an unaffiliated entity of APFS and APA. Any opinions expressed in this forum are not the opinion or view of American Portfolios Financial Services Incorporated, APFS, or American Portfolios Advisors Incorporated, APA, and have not been reviewed by the firm for completeness or accuracy. These opinions are subject to change at any time without notice. Any comments or postings are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or a recommendation to buy or sell securities or other financial instruments. Readers should conduct their own review and exercise judgment prior to investing. Investments are not guaranteed, involve risk, and may result in a loss of principal. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Investments are not suitable for all types of investors.